All right, let's cut through the noise before we even get into names and numbers. You've seen the meme I posted? I get a very good defensive player and you get a player I no longer want and a crappy draft pick. It's funny, but it also nails the problem with trade talk on social. People throw around hypothetical swaps like they're Madden trades, and the reality of NFL contracts, prorated guarantees, and on-field production rarely matches the drama. The NFL trade deadline brings out that clickbait energy. Everyone wants a splash, but you and I both know splash moves require real assets and real appetite from other teams. So today we're doing something different. Instead of screaming, trade this guy or cut that guy, I'm going to walk you through what actual market value looks like for the names people keep begging the Cowboys to move. Contracts, snap counts, penalties, scheme fit, those matter more than hot takes. Before we get into the players, I need you for a second. If you want the Cowboys to do something useful at the deadline, not just a headline, but a move that actually helps the team, hit that like button right now. And if you're not subscribed, we're trying to hit 16,000 subscribers. Do me a favor and tap subscribe, turn on notifications, and you'll help us keep tracking every rumor and the fallout live. That support matters, and it helps us get more scoop and do more breakdowns for you. Okay, framework. For each player, I'll give you the real-world picture. How much the new team would immediately owe prorated this year. What the recent play and injury history say about their upside, and what you can realistically expect back on the market. No fantasy trade trees, just practical value. Also, I want you involved. Throughout this video, I'll throw up quick interaction prompts. For example, when we get to Diggs, you'll see people on social yelling, "Trade him." But I want you to answer in the comments, T for trade, K for keep, or C for cut. Don't overthink it. Just type the letter that matches how you feel after each breakdown. That gives us a real-time pulse of what fans want, and lets me know whether I should push harder for moves or argue for patience. One more ground rule. The Cowboys aren't going to move clear starters for pennies just because the fan base is frustrated. If they want a meaningful upgrade at the deadline, they'll have to give up something or take back real money. So when you hear proposals, like, give Sam Williams and a fifth for a top pass rusher, be skeptical. And if you want the Cowboys to be active and smart at the deadline, show it with a like and by subscribing. We've got a target and we'll hit it together. All right, with the disclaimer out of the way, let's start walking the roster, beginning with the cornerbacks everyone keeps bringing up. Trevon Diggs is the name that keeps coming up in every comment section, every live chat, every post on social media. Trade Diggs. Bench him. He's overrated. You've seen it all. And look, I get the frustration. It's been a weird year for him. The concussion situation threw everything off, and when he's been on the field, the scheme hasn't exactly helped him shine. Dallas has leaned far too heavy into zone coverage, and if there's one thing Diggs is built for, it's man-to-man. That's where he thrives. You can blame whoever you want for the message delivery, but the message itself, that Dallas should be playing more man coverage, is dead on. Here's what's interesting, though. In the 6 games he's played, he's only been targeted 16 times. That's 11 catches allowed, all mostly in zone. But there have been 2 games, 2 full games, where opposing offenses just flat-out ignored his side of the field. That tells you he's still respected, even if the highlight plays haven't been there. The bigger issue is this: value. What's his real trade value right now? And here's where we take that fantasy football dream and bring it crashing back to earth. If Dallas were to move Diggs, the new team would owe him the prorated portion of his $15 million salary, plus some roster bonuses depending on timing. That's not cheap money for a corner who's been banged up and whose play has dipped. And from the Cowboys side, you've got to ask, does it make sense to dump a starting caliber corner for essentially no return? Because right now, that's all you'd get. Maybe a late day 3-pick swap. That's it. And let's be real. If there was real interest around the league, Jerry Jones would have made that call back in the offseason. But there wasn't, and there still isn't. Between the contract, the injury, and the inconsistency, teams just aren't lining up. So that brings us to the real question. What would you do with Trevon Diggs? Trade him and try to cut your losses? Keep him and hope he rebounds under the current staff? Or go nuclear and move on completely this offseason? Drop your vote right now in the comments. T for trade, K for keep, or C for cut. Let's see what the real fan pulse is, not the social media overreactions. Personally, I think the most realistic path is keeping him through the rest of the year, hoping for better man coverage looks, and then reassessing once you see if he fits in the long-term plan. But maybe you feel different. And that's why your take matters. If you're still with me and you want more Cowboys fans to be part of this conversation, hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds. But it tells YouTube this video deserves to reach more Dallas fans who need to hear the truth behind the rumors. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do that now. We're pushing towards 16,000 subscribers. And you don't want to miss the next chapter, because we're getting into another hot name in trade talks, Jaylen Tolbert, the receiver who can't seem to catch a break on this roster. Jaylen Tolbert's situation is one of those stories that perfectly sums up how fast things change in the NFL. Just a year ago, he looked like a player finally finding his rhythm, a guy who could come through with clutch catches when the team needed it most. Remember those moments? The grab against Pittsburgh, the key play versus Green Bay? Those flashes are what keep you believing there's something there. But here we are, and it feels like Tolbert has quietly slipped down the depth chart once again. It's not necessarily that he's done anything wrong. It's more that the wide receiver room around him has shifted. Younger, faster, healthier players have started eating into his snaps. Guys like George Pickens and even Ryan Fenoy, who's made the most of every opportunity, have simply passed him up. And with more players returning from injury soon, it's getting crowded fast. So that brings us to the big question. Does it make sense to keep Tolbert buried as a WR4 or WR5, or try to flip him for something before the deadline? Let's talk numbers, because that's where trade talk gets real. Any team trading for Tolbert would take on a prorated figure of about $1.7 to $1.8 million. It's not outrageous, but for a guy who projects more as depth than a true starter, it's not an easy sell either. Dallas would love to open up a roster spot, but what do you actually get back? Maybe, and that's being optimistic, a late day 3 pick. And if you're honest about the way NFL front offices think, most teams already have their own version of Jaylen Tolbert. A solid, dependable receiver who can make the occasional play but isn't moving the needle. Here's where I want you to weigh in. Would you trade Jaylen Tolbert just to clear space and get something, anything, in return? Or would you rather hold on, keep him as depth, and see what he can do if injuries hit again? Drop your answer in the comments right now. Just a simple yes or no. And if you want to go deeper, tell me why. Does it make sense to cash out what little value he has left? Or is this one of those cases where you're better off standing pat? Personally, I think it depends on what the Cowboys want to do at the deadline. If they're buyers, you need every bit of roster flexibility you can get. Moving Tolbert could help create that breathing room. But if they stay quiet, if they don't go chasing a big move, you might just keep him around. He knows the system, he can play inside or outside, and he's come through in big spots before. Not flashy, but dependable. The defensive line is where things start to get really tricky for Dallas. There's just too much talent and not enough playing time to go around. That sounds like a good problem, but when the trade deadline gets close, it becomes a roster management headache. Let's start with Sam Williams, because this is the guy who gets mentioned the most whenever fans start throwing out trade ideas. Someone joked online, "Did he even play?" And the funny part is, that's not totally unfair. Against Washington, he played the second most snaps among edge rushers, and yet it barely registered. No big splash plays, no pressure that stood out, no real presence. And when you look at this rotation, Dante Fowler, DeMarcus Lawrence, Chauncey Golston, Dorrance Armstrong before the injury, Jalix Hunt, and now even Jadeveon Clowney. There's just no clear lane for Williams to become a difference maker. If Dallas goes out and adds another pass rusher, somebody has to go. You can't carry 7 edges and expect to give everyone meaningful reps. Now, Williams is cheap. That's what keeps him interesting to other teams. His base salary is just $155 million, basically vet minimum money. But cheap doesn't equal valuable. He's still inconsistent as a run defender, he's got more penalties than sacks in his career, and his development has stalled. That extension talk from earlier in the season never made sense, not when you look at the production. So the best you could probably hope for in a trade is a late day 3 pick, or maybe he's used as a sweetener in a bigger deal. Think of him as an add-on, not a centerpiece. Now let's move to the interior, because Mazi Smith is where the real disappointment sits. This was a first-round pick, a guy who was supposed to anchor the middle of that defense for the next 5 to 7 years. Instead, he's become a rotation player who sometimes can't even crack the active lineup. 2 tackles this season. That's it. The run defense grade, below average. The pressure rate, technically a career high, but still nothing impressive. He's been alternating game day status with T'Vondre Sweat and others, and that's a huge red flag for a player drafted that high. The problem with moving him is financial. His contract includes guaranteed money for next year, $2.56 million all locked in. If you trade him, the new team takes on about $1.9 million this year, but they're also committing to that guaranteed cash in 2026. So the return is minimal. Maybe a day 3 pick from a team that still believes in his first-round pedigree. Maybe. Here's where I want you to jump in. Would you move on from Mazi Smith or Sam Williams if it meant creating roster flexibility for a deadline addition? Let's say you could get a 6th or 7th round pick. Would you pull the trigger or hold on and hope one of them finally breaks out? Drop a quick Y for yes or N for no in the comments. And before we move on, let's clear up one more name that keeps coming up, Terrence Steele. I know a lot of fans think he could bring some value on the trade market. He probably could. But here's the problem. Why trade away your best run blocker when your offense is finally finding rhythm? If you were losing every week, sure, that conversation makes sense. But not now. You can't weaken your offensive line mid-season just to chase a draft pick. At this point, the trend is clear. The Cowboys aren't sitting on gold mines. Other teams don't want your underperforming or injury-prone depth pieces. They want value. And if Dallas really wants a top-tier player, they'll need to give something real in return. Damone Clark is the perfect example of how the NFL can be brutally honest. You can have the talent, you can have the story, but if the production and consistency aren't there, teams move on. And that's exactly what's happening here. When Clark first cracked the lineup, a lot of fans thought he'd grow into that every-down linebacker role. Instead, every coaching staff that's come through has landed on the same conclusion. He's not that guy. This season, he's been buried on the depth chart, sitting as linebacker 5, and you can tell by how little impact he's had on the field, 12 tackles in 6 games. That's not starter-level production, especially for someone making a pro-rated $348 million base salary. At that number, it's hard to find a trade partner. You're talking about a player who's expensive relative to his output, and who's been benched multiple times over 2 seasons. If Dallas could get a 7th rounder for him, that would already be a win. But the truth is, there's probably no real market for Clark at all. He's more likely a cut or off-season move than an in-season trade. And that's been the story for a lot of the names we've covered. Here's the reality. Teams around the league don't line up to take your unwanted players. They don't see value where you see frustration. They want upside, potential, or a contract they can work with, not another team's. Problem. So when fans start saying, trade our depth guys and get a star, it just doesn't work like that. The Cowboys can't flip a handful of low-performing players into a top pass rusher or elite corner. If you want a star, you've got to put something real on the table, so that's the balance Dallas has to strike at the deadline. If you're winning and the roster's clicking, you don't want to shake the chemistry just to make noise. But if you're thinking long-term, maybe you do start quietly, shopping a couple of names to free up cap space or future roster spots. That's smart business, not panic. Now I want to hear from you. If you could make one move before the deadline, what would it be? A. Flip a depth piece for a late pick. B. Stand pat and keep the roster as is. Or C. Package a couple of players and picks to bring in a legitimate starter. Drop your choice in the comments. I'll be checking to see where the fan base stands. And as we wrap this up, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. We're pushing hard towards 16,000 subscribers, and every single one helps us keep breaking down these stories, rumors, and roster moves as they happen. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more updates on any real trade buzz that might develop, hit like so this video reaches more Cowboys fans who need to hear the truth behind the rumors. That's the realistic look at the Cowboys trade market. Which players might move, which likely won't, and why. The headlines rarely match the financial and roster reality. Stick with us, stay informed, and don't fall for the hype.